Welcome back. This is the second part in our series on leading. And Indira Gandhi, one of the more famous leaders of India over the last century, once said that whenever you take a step forward, you're bound to disturb something. So in the leadership context, that means that when you lead, some people are going to be upset with you. You're going to change things and disturb things. You won't be able to please all the people all the time, and you have to accept that as part of leadership. Now, if you think about great leaders, you might be able to come up with some key names. For example, a recent Fortune's list includes Jack Ma, the co-founder and executive chairman of Alibaba, Angela Merkel, the first female chancellor of Germany, and she was seen as a de facto leader of the European Union. But why? What do these people have, or what do they do? And is it more than just their characteristics or their actions? Does it have the situations play a part as well? So this leads nicely into our two learning objectives for this section. After viewing this mini lecture, you should be able to answer the questions: what are the important leadership traits and behaviours, and what are the contingency theories of leadership? The contingency theories are particularly important for understanding how leadership operates today. So first of all, here's a young Martin Luther King. You may know him as the man who had the "I Have a Dream" speech. As an American activist, he was seeking to advance civil rights through non-violent means. So Martin Luther King said, "The ultimate measure of a man or a person is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. A true neighbour will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others." So what he's saying is that there are times when you just have to take a stand. And a leader, once they've set their direction, and although they're responsive to situations and to those around them, sometimes a leader just has to lead and to be different in their approach. So as we look at the theories of leadership over the earlier part of last century, there are a lot of studies to try and find out what are the essential traits or behaviours of leaders. And these are some of the common answers to the question of what is a great leader? What do they have? We've spoken earlier about enthusiasm before, but drive is another important area of leadership where you have a degree of energy and initiative and tenacity. It means that you're able to stick to something and follow it through. So a bit like what Martin Luther King was saying. You have to have a degree of self-confidence to be creative in finding solutions. And you have to be smart enough to interpret information and have a degree of business knowledge that will set you apart from others. There's also motivation, so that emotional aspect. You need to be flexible in different situations. And something that's commonly thought of as the key aspect of leadership is integrity. So being able to walk the talk and saying what you mean and being really honest in all your situations. So trait theories are one set of management ideas regarding leadership. They focus on what leaders have, or what good leaders have. In terms of theories that have looked at leadership in relation to traits, the conclusion is that there's no clear, defined set of leadership traits. So even as we look back on the list here, there are leaders who may not necessarily be full of self-confidence or necessarily motivated all the time. For example, Winston Churchill. He's a famous leader from the UK, again around that Second World War time, but he suffered significantly from bouts of depression, really serious bouts of depression. So at times he wasn't very motivated. So you can't just have a tick list of what will make a good leader. There were also leaders who were not very effective public speakers. They didn't exude that sense of self-confidence. But what we can say, that although these are common traits of leaders, if we think about them as being positive aspects of leadership, you don't have to have them all. And the research shows us that some people have very few of these aspects, but there are other aspects of leadership they have which sets them apart. So that's a really important understanding about this when we ask the question, what are the key traits, what are the key behaviours? The answer is there's no clear conclusion on that particular topic. There's different aspects and some are useful and positive, but we can't say definitively that if you have these sets of traits, you'll be a good leader. So So following from that is the idea of the behaviour theories. So they focused on how leaders behave in working with followers. So this is about what leaders do. Leadership styles are seen as recurring patterns of these behaviours exhibited by leaders. So as we think about the behaviours, we can put them into two categories. Leaders can be seen as employee or people-oriented, or they can be seen as task or production-oriented. So there are kinds of behaviours that are associated with these two areas. So task concerns where you plan and define the work to be done, where you assign responsibilities, you have clear standards, you urge for task completion so that you're following through and monitoring the results. On the other hand, we've got the people concerns, and that's where we act warm and supportive towards our followers, develop rapport, communication with those followers, and lots of respect of others' feelings and sensitive to their needs and developing that trust in the followers. Now we've got two researchers, Blake and Mouton. They use these behaviours to define different leadership styles. And these leadership styles help us to understand where certain people are at and whether their style in fact needs to develop from that particular position. So if we have a look at their grid, in the top left-hand corner we can see the country club manager. The country club manager has a high concern for people but a low concern for task and production. Now you might be wondering why the term country club manager. Well, if you think about country clubs, they're seen as nice places to be in. They're fun, they're enjoyable, you can go there to rest and relax. So an organisation where you've got a country club manager, it's like that. It's a great atmosphere, warm and fuzzy, but perhaps not much gets done. And then just below that, we've got the impoverished manager. So the impoverished manager has a low concern for people, but also a low concern for production. So this sort of leader's probably being put into that position without necessarily being recognised by the followers as being an effective leader. It's just someone who's marking time in the position, doing the minimum effort that they need to get the minimum work done. Now if we go across in the next section, we've got the authority obedience manager. This is someone who says, let's get things done. There's a low concern for the people, but it's a strong focus on getting the job done. A lot of people can earn respect in this position because no matter what, the person could be very difficult to deal with, they still get the things done, but they don't necessarily have a great sense of leadership. Now, there's no reason why you can't get things done and still show a concern for people. So this is the team manager. They're building on participation, support, they're communicating and getting that shared sense of purpose as part of the visionary leadership. You've also got in the middle, the middle of the road manager. They're focused on balancing the work output as well as the morale. Now these things are important, but the team manager is usually the most effective in different situations. Now, as mentioned earlier, it's more than just traits and behaviours, that we need to also look at the situation in which a leader's operating. And this is where we look at the contingency theories of leadership. So these sort of state that for effective leadership, you have to get a match between the leader's behaviour and the situation or the context. Now, the former US President John F. Kennedy, he noted that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. So this means that as a leader, you don't stop learning. There's always new skills to develop, there's new knowledge to acquire, and you have that continual development process in terms of your leadership. And that way you're continuing to refresh yourself and be most effective in different situations. So the contingency theories of leadership say that we have to match a certain style of leadership to a situation. And Fiedler's idea of contingency, his contingency model, was that a leader's style is relatively fixed, and the style is similar to what we saw in the Blake and Mouton grid. But basically Fiedler says you're either task-oriented or you're relationship-oriented, and the situation has to match your particular style. The way that you discover a person's leadership style is through a survey that he developed called the Least Preferred Co-worker Questionnaire. And you can see a link here at the bottom of the slide if you want to explore that further. Now, if you have a look at figure 13.4 in your textbook, the Fiedler contingency model says there are two types of leadership, and there are three different situations or contingency dimensions. The first dimension is the degree of the leader-member relations. So whether the leader and the members are close or supportive, whether they're more of a team, or perhaps there's fairly poorly developed relations. And then a situation will often give a certain task structure. So if it's been done before and the tasks have been allocated, people know what they're doing, then that's a high task structure. But in some cases, it's a relatively new situation or a unique circumstance. So the tasks aren't clearly defined. For example, in the way that you might approach a group work, in that the task you have to do as a student, you may find that there's relatively low task structure. It's just get together, work out who's going to do what and how things will go. But in other classes, the lecturer might be saying to you, okay, we've got a certain person in the group, he'll be the coordinator, the leader, and then we'll have someone else who does this particular researching of task, and we'll have someone else who might be writing the presentation up or writing up the report. So there's much clearer task structures. So that's an example of how the task structure can vary. And then the last thing is that the position power. So someone who has a clearly defined position as a leader versus someone who nominates themselves. There's no clear leader. For example, if we go back to that assignment example, in groups you might have that there's often no leaders appointed and it's just up to everybody to get something done. Now in theory, what Fiedler says, if you look at this, is well, if there's high leader-member relations, what kind of leader do you need? If there's low task structure, what do you need? If there's a high position power, what do you need? So often people think that the relationship-oriented leader may be the best one if there's a low leader-member relations. So that kind of makes sense. If there's poor relations, then you need someone who's going to be able to build those relations. But what his research showed us is that in all cases when there are extremes, so low leader-member relations or high leader-member relations or low task structure or high task structure, low position of power or high position of power, so those extremes of the spectrum. The task-oriented leader is the person that's going to be best for the job. And in all the other situations, which are more middle of the road, that's when the relationship-oriented leader is going to be most effective. So that might be a bit counterintuitive to what you'd be expecting, but his research has supported this, and it's one of the early theories of leadership and contingency theories. But there have been more developed after this. So let's have a look at them. The Hersey-Blanchard model is another one of these important contingency theories. It's known as the situational leadership theory. Now the difference here with Hersey and Blanchard's approach to that of Fiedler's is that they say a leader can adjust their style, and there are four dimensions of leadership styles. The participating style of leader, they share the ideas. This is where the relationship behaviour is high. You have to get people involved. It's important to get the followers to share your ideas, and you have a relatively low level of guidance being required. So it's more about finding a solution with an open-ended answer. But in some cases, there's very clear guidance required. For example, if we're involved in safety and safety instruction. It doesn't really matter what your opinion is, there's only one way to do things, and there's not a way to do things if you want to act safely. So in that sort of circumstance where there's a need for high support and high guidance, it's where you're going to be involved in selling, where you're explaining the decisions more up front. Whereas telling is where you're telling people how to do things, but at the same time you're connecting with their emotions and you're supporting them and recognising the situation that they're in. But sometimes when you need more of a telling style, when things have to be done quickly, I just have to tell you what you have to do and we have to go and do it, that's the giving instructions type approach. People don't know what to do, so you have to tell them what to do. And then finally, we've got the delegating, is where you turn over the decisions to others, and it's where you don't need much guidance, you don't need to give much support. The group is able fairly well to look after themselves and get the task done. And at the same time, you need to consider the followers. So perhaps they could be unable to complete the task and unwilling. And in that case, you need to use the telling approach. If they're unable but they are willing to do it, then you'll need the selling approach. It's more about explaining the decisions and building their confidence. They could be able but unwilling, so you need to get them into that participating approach, sharing the ideas, getting the followers on board so that you're all moving in the same direction. And then the last one, the willing and able, that's where you can move into the delegating approach. So managers have to use different styles as they need. So we've touched on a few so far, but there are many different leadership theories. Another approach to understanding leadership is to see that the leader's job is to assist the followers in attaining their goals and to provide direction or support to ensure the goals are compatible with the organisational goals. So House's path goal theory reflects these ideas. He believes that there are two types of contingency factors, the environment and the person. So firstly, it's important that you consider the person or the subordinate. What's their ability? What's their level of experience? And what's their locus of control? Now, in case you weren't aware, the locus of control basically means that you believe you have the power over changing something rather than seeing things as just happening to you. So if you have an external locus of control, you see that things just happen to you. Or if you have an internal locus of control, you see that you have the power to control things and change things. The other important situational contingencies include the task structure, which we've talked about before, the authority system, that is the position of the leader in the organisation, and the work group, which is similar to the idea of leader-member relations. So the leader employs various behaviours in order to show people a path towards reaching a goal. So you should see a similarity here between House's leader behaviours and those of Hersey Blanchard in terms of the style of being directive or telling people what to do, being supportive, understanding the emotions and positions and being empathetic where the person is at, focusing more on achievement, so again celebrating the success and inspiring people to do more than what they were just doing at one particular point, and the participative behaviours. So these behaviours are employed depending on the different situational contingencies, and when you employ the right style, then you'll be effective in helping people to find the right path to achieve their goal. Now, House also said that in some cases there are substitutes for leadership where you actually don't need a leader involved in a continuous way. This could be because the subordinates themselves, they might have a lot of motivation or they have a lot of experience, so it's important for them to be relatively independent. And sometimes, in the case of an organisation, their organisational culture is what drives them towards greater participation. But in some cases, tasks are routine and there's feedback which is available which tells the worker whether they're on track or not. Now, another theory which helps us understand participation is the Vroom-Yago participation model. It's a theory that says that leaders should change their style in relation to the context. The model explains how leaders should choose the method of decision making. So in this theory, the effective leader is one who can choose and implement the most appropriate decision path, and the leader looks towards the type of decision that must be made. There's three different types of decisions. There's authoritative, consultative, or group. An authority decision is where you make a decision and you tell the people what they need to do. Whereas a consultative decision, you're getting all the information from others and consulting with them, but then the leader still makes that decision. At the other end is the group decision. This is where you fully participate in defining the problem, the situation, and finding the solution. So according to this particular model, the decision effectiveness depends on the quality, the type of decision, and the need for acceptance. If you need more acceptance in the decision making, then you're going to choose more of a consultative approach. You're going to choose more of a group decision approach. And the time pressure is also an aspect of decision making. So if there's low time pressure for decision making, then you have the time to discuss and work it out together. But sometimes there is no time. And you have to make that authority decision. You just have to get in, decide, and get the people to follow. So we've now covered quite a lot of different theories, and we've covered the key contingency theories of leadership. So I want you to pause the recording now and you can make some notes. But there are two key takeaway points. The first one is that the early leadership styles have shown unsuccessfully, or they've searched unsuccessfully for some kind of clear, definitive set of personal traits that differentiated whether someone was going to be a good leader or a not good leader, or an ineffective leader. So it's really important to remember that there's no one leadership style that's going to work best, which really goes against the approach of Frederick Taylor we've talked about earlier in the course. The contingency style says you've got to find the best style that matches the situation and the demands of each situation. You've got to assess the whole situation and know your strengths and styles. So I'll pause the recording here and I'll see you again really soon.